Staff Lieutenant Jim Etzin from the Farmington Hills Fire Department. We are approaching tomorrow the 20th anniversary of the horrific attacks in New York, Washington, D.C., and in Pennsylvania on September 11th, 2001. And at that time, Jim Etzin was a firefighter paramedic, and then shortly after the tragedy, about a month later, went on a journey walking from the Ambassador Bridge all the way to Brooklyn to raise awareness and raise funds for those who were affected by the deaths of first responders responding to that tragedy. We're pleased to be joined by Staff Lieutenant Etzin now on the MegaCast. Lieutenant, thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Tyler. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks for being with us. We appreciate it. So I want to start with my first question for you. It seems to be the question that everybody has for someone else when they talk about this horrible tragedy or about any anniversary. Where were you on September 11th, 2001?
I was at home. I was actually off duty at the time, and I was doing some work around the house and watching a morning television show when they cut to New York City, showing what was happening in real time. And like countless people around the world, I was shocked at what I saw.
Yeah, I think anybody that watched that live or has watched any footage of it, I mean, it's shocking. It's jarring to this day. And to think about it being 20 years ago is just as crazy, because it's something that did truly change our world, and it certainly changed the lives, and it changed the outlook of people that were on the front lines responding to this, and those like them in fire departments, police departments all throughout the U.S. Of course, 343 firefighters from the FDNY lost their lives in the tragedy in New York on that day. And let's talk about your journey after the incident, because seeing that as a first responder has to be a different perspective than as a civilian like myself or like Calvin or anyone else on our team witnessing a tragedy like that. As a first responder and your colleagues on the front lines here in Michigan, what were your initial thoughts in the wake of that tragedy, and then not only about seeing something so horrific happen to your brothers and your sisters who work in fire departments throughout the U.S., but also about your outlook going forward as a first responder?
Well, as I said earlier, when I was watching the events in real time, my initial reaction was the same as everyone else. It was shock. And then my thoughts started transitioning to not only the victims, but the emergency responders who would be arriving within moments to start rescuing people and caring for them. And when I saw the first plane strike the tower, I had my suspicions, because it was a clear day, and I had some suspicions of terrorism, and obviously those suspicions were confirmed by the events that would follow. So immediately my thoughts went to the firefighters and EMS providers and law enforcement officers that would be responding to that tragedy. And the sheer magnitude of it was something that was really unprecedented in our country, absent of events such as Pearl Harbor.
We're joined by Staff Lieutenant Jim Etzin from the Farmington Hills Fire Department, joining us on the MegaCast. And 20 years ago, in the wake of the September 11th attacks, Lieutenant Etzin went on a 9-day, 755-mile walk from the Ambassador Bridge to the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. And let's talk about that journey and leading up to that, because what went behind that decision to ultimately make that journey, and maybe who did you consult with before you did that to see if they would join you in that, or to raise awareness for that, to ultimately go toward the cause and the awareness that you were hoping to raise for those families of those first responders who were affected by the tragic events of September 11th, 2001?
Well, Tyler, I think I speak on behalf of all emergency responders throughout the United States at that time. In the moments and hours and days following, we all wanted to respond to New York City, to the Pentagon, to help our brothers and sisters deal with those tragedies. But in the fire service, we're very disciplined, and we don't come unless we are officially requested. So we started in the days and weeks that followed, we started thinking of ways that we could help them without responding. And there were obviously many discussions concerning fundraising, but we started talking about demonstrations of solidarity, ways that first responders here in Michigan could let our brothers and sisters in New York know that they were truly in our thoughts and prayers, and we were with them in spirit, and anything that we could do to demonstrate that solidarity, I think, would be welcomed. So that was the initial thought process, and then it just rapidly developed into something much larger than that. Everything that we did was about people in New York, those that were lost, those that survived. But we recognized the moment we started that walk that it was a mechanism of sorts for people in communities small and large between Detroit and New York City to reach out, to grieve, to extend their support, to donate money that we passed on to the Widows and Children's Funds for the FDNY and the NYPD. It was an event it became an event much larger than what we thought it was going to be.
We're joined by Staff Lieutenant Jim Etzin from the Farmington Hills Fire Department, who 20 years ago made a journey walking from the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit to the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City just in the months after the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. Along the way, the walk raised about $40,000 for the Widows and Children's Funds for New York City's fire and police departments, who had a significant loss of lives on that day. 343 firemen from the FDNY, 37 Port Authority officers, and 23 NYPD officers lost their life at Ground Zero at the World Trade Centers on September 11th, 2001. And Jim, what was the reaction from people along the way? Because it's a long journey from the Ambassador Bridge in downtown Detroit to New York City. What was the reaction from people that you met along the way, and how did that impact both you personally and the overarching meaning of taking a journey like that at that time in our nation's history?
Well, I entitled the walk Bridge by Bridge, or Bridge to Bridge, Side by Side. And really how the walk worked was it was a 24-hour-a-day operation. So there were always firefighters and law enforcement officers that were walking at all days or all hours of the day and night. And we were walking side by side. We would be joined by emergency responders from the community that we were passing through at the time, whether they were walking with us or taking part in the vehicle procession that followed us. And and we had 3 helmets that we carried throughout the walk that we passed on to emergency responders in New York, 2 fire helmets and one law enforcement or ballistic helmet that we carried and passed from person to person over the course of the walk. And there's really no other way to describe it. I served in the military prior to my 27 years on the Farmington Hills Fire Department. And I think that, the United States, I'm certainly biased, is the greatest country in the world. And one way that you can really gain an appreciation for that, or further appreciation for it, is it's one thing to drive through a community. It's another thing to walk through it, and the time it takes to walk through even the smallest of towns and interact with its residents and appreciate the culture of that community, and to share that grief and sorrow. Because in the 20 years since, I've never seen this country so unified as it was even a month after September 11th. So to give those people an opportunity to grieve with us and to extend their well wishes to the people of New York, I think was therapeutic for all of us. And we literally passed through, we had mapped out the route beforehand. We were escorted by local law enforcement and firefighters the entire way. And we literally passed through hundreds of communities and met thousands of people.
We're joined by Staff Lieutenant Jim Etzin of the Farmington Hills Fire Department with us on the MegaCast. 20 years ago, made a 9-day, 755-mile journey walking from the Ambassador Bridge in downtown Detroit to the Brooklyn Bridge in New York in an effort he called Bridge to Bridge, Side by Side, and raised about $40,000 on the way on that journey for the funds for the widows and the children who lost parents, who lost husbands, who lost wives, and beloved family down at Ground Zero at the World Trade Centers on September 11th. And Lieutenant, when you did arrive and when your fellow first responders did arrive in New York, what was the response from those on the front lines who you were showing support for, and also from those families that were so tragically affected by those horrific attacks, who bridge to bridge, side by side, ultimately raised so much money to provide support for in their time of need?
Well, Tyler, that's an interesting question, because we made a point of mapping out a route that would be as least impactful as possible. The last thing we wanted to do is interrupt the normal day-to-day operations of any given community and their public safety agencies. So we purposely chose a route that we thought we'd stay out of a lot of people's way. When we arrived at the George Washington Bridge, about to enter the city of New York, our escorts actually asked us to pause the walk for about an hour or so, and we were the entire way we were following the direction of local emergency responders. Again, we didn't want to disrupt anything that was going on, and I inquired as to what we were prepared to wait as long as we needed to, and I asked what the delay was, and they said that they were simply lining up resources in the city to escort us down to the Brooklyn Bridge. And I immediately said I had fears of taking resources away from more important things than our walk, and they said that there was that day there was nothing more important in the city of New York than what we were doing. So we waited for the NYPD to get themselves in a position to provide us with an escort all throughout Manhattan down to the fire station at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. And when we arrived there, members of the FDNY, including some of their command staff, were extraordinarily welcoming, and we didn't necessarily need that. I mean, again, this was just a mechanism for people to demonstrate their solidarity and to grieve, and we just wanted to kind of go about our way as quietly as we could in doing that. But the FDNY and the NYPD were very appreciative for what we had done, and it was kind of an indescribably emotional evening where we had the opportunity to interact with them and speak to them about what their lives were like the last prior to September 11th and in the month since. And then I'll simply add that I personally could think of nothing more than my family at that point, and just wanted to, we went on this journey and we completed our mission of sorts, but I wanted to get back to my family as quickly as I could.
We're joined by Staff Lieutenant Jim Etzin from the Farmington Hills Fire Department with us on the MegaCast. 20 years ago, made his journey from the Ambassador Bridge to the George Washington Bridge in New York in support of first responders who had not only lost their lives, but were also providing such great support in the recovery effort and to try to save whatever lives they could that remained at Ground Zero following the horrific attacks in New York on September 11th, 2001. Nowadays, Jim's current position is as a Fire and Emergency Medical Services Coordinator at the Oakland Tactical Training Consortium, or OAKTAC. And so before we say goodbye today, Lieutenant, I do want to ask, how did the events of 9/11 and the experiences of first responders on that day and in the wake of the attacks, how does that inform the way that you approach being a first responder and training the next generation of first responders?
Well, thank you for that question, Tyler. And the things that come to mind are that the country as a whole, I wish not only on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, but every day to remember how unified we're capable of being, and to find a way to find some common ground every day of the week, every week of the year, to try and give fellow members of our community the benefit of the doubt. Be grateful for this thing called life, because it is fleeting and it can be taken away from us at any time. Those emergency responders on September 11th in New York, they literally gave everything that day to help fellow members of their community. And all firefighters and law enforcement officers would like to believe that we have that courage within us, and that courage was tested. Those emergency responders in New York that day, and they passed that test with flying colors, unfortunately at the cost of their lives. And there was a September 11th commission that was convened after those tragic events that brought terrorism more to the forefront of what we do. And it wouldn't be fair for me to ask the community to learn the lessons of that day without asking emergency responders to do the same. So we join members of our community in continually hoping for the best of circumstances, but we would be derelict in our duties if we weren't preparing for the worst each and every day. So I just ask for everyone to find a way to unify, and for all emergency responders to keep working as hard as they do to be prepared for the next tragedy, because we wish it wouldn't come, but there's something on the horizon, and we need to be ready for it.
We're joined by Staff Lieutenant Jim Etzin of the Farmington Hills Fire Department and currently of the OCTAC Consortium. Lieutenant, before we say goodbye today, anything else that you believe would be important for our audience to know, or anything else that you'd like to say to our audience today?
No, I think we've covered it, Tyler. I would just ask that in many communities throughout Metro Detroit, there will be remembrances of September 11th, and I make a point of trying to go to as many of those as possible. And it's disappointing to see how many non-emergency responders or family members of emergency responders attend those events. I realize we're coming to the end of our summer. Everyone wants to enjoy being outside, especially given what's been going on with COVID-19. But if the people listening to this or watching this could take an hour out of their day to attend one of those ceremonies and truly remember and pay tribute to those who we lost, I know I would be greatly appreciative.
Well, Staff Lieutenant, we appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.